Welcome to the Zachrilege Cast podcast, YouTube video interview program that features me talking to some of the best and brightest in the atheist / secular / awesome community. This is episode number 138, and I'm recording live on April 8th, 2018. I would like to thank Matthew James for being last week's guest. He's the author of Only an Atheist Can Help God Save the World and Jesus Returns. Still waiting, no Jesus. If you want a copy of both books, tell me what style of beer Matthew drank during last week's show. So I have two big moments to announce here. The first is I have a flat earth troll who's commenting on some of my videos. Hi, dude. Also, Larry Wilson joins the patron crowd. So hello, Larry, and please tell me what style of beer you'd like me to get you if we happen to meet in the future. It's hard to do a podcast. It's harder to do one with multiple co-hosts who are in multiple countries. But that's what Nathan Dickey does with Trolling with Logic. And now he has his own solo show, A Leap of Doubt. Many are afraid to leap and others take the plunge, assuming there's water and the water's deep enough. And you see where this is going. Welcome to the show, all the way from the West Coast.
Oh, hello. Thanks. And it's great to be here. And you kind of put a lot of pressure on me by saying that your guests are the best and the brightest in the community. So hopefully no pressure on me there.
That's right. All the pressure. Well, this should get you in the right frame of mind. I have one out of context quote. We have to bring semen into this somehow.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that was from the Science Enthusiast, right?
Yep, I remember.
The dearly departed Science Enthusiast podcast. I don't think it still exists.
Yeah, they closed down.
We're waiting until we're the only two who are doing podcasts on the secular atheist whatever side. We got rid of a few, but there's still some left. Now we're going to start tonight talking about the first show you worked on, Trolling with Logic. Your first show, your first love. So we'll start there. So what's the history of the show itself? Like, how did it get started? It seems like it's been around for a while.
Yeah, so it started in 2009, I believe, way long before I was ever involved in any online activity related to secularism at all. And it started out as a YouTube show, a YouTube channel that did live shows. They talked about mainly science-related issues, covering mostly pseudoscience, and it was what was termed at the time like a ponage channel. Like they would interview creationists and conspiracy theorists, and they would bring people on that were kind of on the fringe and try to have a discussion. And so creationism was a big topic that they covered, which was kind of the case for a lot of YouTube back then. And also like New Age type beliefs, conspiracy theories, fringe beliefs of all kinds. And then it kind of evolved from there, and they realized that they were really good at having guests on to talk about interesting topics. And so it kind of evolved into a podcast with guests, special guests on most of the episodes, talking about, again, mostly science-related issues and topics. Like we've done episodes about GMOs and biotech, nuclear energy, all sorts of topics.
Well, how did you get to be on the show and then to get to be kind of one of the main co-hosts?
So Trolling with Logic has a website, and we run a network of blogs on that website. I was initially involved as just a blog writer writing for that website's network. And the main co-host, Cal, who's been with the show since the beginning, he took notice of my writings, invited me on the show a couple times to fill in when they had co-host missing, and eventually decided to invite me as a regular host. And he was working pretty heavily on an engineering degree at the time, and so had to take a step back to devote more time to that. So he said, "Why don't you take the reins as the main host?" And I did that in October of 2016, and I've been the main host since then. And Cal has continued to be a regular on the show with me. He and I are actually on the show more often than any of the other co-hosts. So that's a little bit of history and background as to how I grasped the reins of power.
I know the American always coming in and saying, this is how things are. Now the co-hosts you have, the few episodes I listened to, everybody's got great accents. Where's everybody? Who are the co-hosts? And is there like a full? Was it like 4 people total? Because I see 4 on the show picture. And Where's everybody located? And all
that. So Cal McDonald is located in Scotland, and Jenna Bowyer is from Manchester, England. Michael Kitching, our resident PhD in biotech guy, he's in Ireland somewhere. Sometimes he makes appearances in Singapore from time to time. He travels a lot. And I'm here on the West Coast. So, yeah, a little bit of a challenge in coordinating times to record, but we usually have a set time. When we do have a show planned, we have a set time that we set up on, usually on Sundays, so it's not too big of a hurdle.
It's a pretty big thing in the community to do movie reviews, but I always find it tough to listen to shows about a movie that I haven't seen. Do you prefer doing like the zeitgeist type reviews? The GMO. There was a GMO episode. I think that might have been the last one, number 60. Or do you prefer to review movies that you actually like Network? And we'll talk about Network. First time we get to talk about Network. 138 episodes. Sorry.
I like both. I really like interviewing, or I really like reviewing garbage movies, like pseudoscience documentaries and conspiracy documentaries and movies that have a lot of bad science in them, because those represent a chance to have a lot of fun, making fun of the bad science and the bad information. And at the same time, it represents an educational opportunity to actually explain why the science or the information, whatever it's about, is wrong. And so diving into pseudoscience and explaining why it's wrong is a great way and an entertaining way to learn about real science in the process. So I have a lot of fun with pseudoscience and general bad movies like that. I do also enjoy reviewing movies I like for different reasons. I'm not sure which I enjoy more.
Yeah, I almost wanted to say, let's just talk about Network for an hour, just because we're both journalism degree holders, which means we have not great job prospects for the rest of our lives. But we also discovered this movie that came out in like 1976 and basically predicted kind of reality TV, was written like a stage play and had great performances. I think it swept the Oscars for like all the acting awards that year.
I believe so.
What is, why did you decide to do that movie in particular?
Well, that movie in particular was Cal's idea to review, and I jumped all over it and was like, why didn't I think of that? Because, well, I guess one reason I hadn't really thought about it first myself, it's because at the time we recorded that episode, we had just recently explored the idea of, hey, let's review some good movies for a change. And I'm actually responsible and mostly to blame for getting Cal interested in journalism. He likes to make fun of journalists, but he's also fascinated by it at the same time. So he floated that idea, and I was like, that's a great idea. Let's review Network and talk about the impact it's made on the broadcasting industry, everything it predicted, why it continues to be considered an important landmark film for journalism, and why journalism majors like myself found it in the required coursework in college. It was required viewing. We were actually assigned to watch that movie in one of my classes. So
it's a pretty good class.
Yep.
It's a good choice. Yeah, I was thinking, like god-awful movies, there's a lot of shows, or at least segments on shows, that talk about Christian movies, but the whole pseudoscience stuff doesn't get enough attention. So yeah, I'm glad that
yeah, and it's a real shame, because those movies are so prevalent. The movies that talk about how GMOs are unsafe and dangerous and they're poisoning us, and vaccines are an evil conspiracy to poison us and make us receptive citizens of the evil one world government, or whatever they're saying now. Those kind of scaremongering documentaries are what sell, and they're so prevalent. And it's hard to find like a good quality science and evidence-based documentary touching on things like vaccines and climate change and GMOs and nuclear energy. It's all the scary stuff that sells. And a big reason for that is because the only people really talking about it are the skeptics. So in one sense, us talking about it on our podcast and me writing about it in various places has not a lot of potential, because it is read and listened to by fellow skeptics and not generally by the general public. They're not drawn to having scary things debunked, and for whatever reason, the general public that eats this stuff up, they generally aren't attracted to things, media or writings that are focused on saying, okay, calm down, here's why you shouldn't be afraid. And that's unfortunate, I think.
That'd be a good name for a documentary.
What would be a good name for
There's no reason to be afraid.
It's a little bit long.
Well, there are not as many reasons to be afraid as you think. So what happened to touring with, like, you got in charge of the show, and now you're telling me it's on a break? Like, I've just discovered the show, and now you're telling me, you're on a break. Yeah. You're seeing other shows. What's happening here?
So we're on a little bit of a break because we're having some technical issues, including trying to line up an editor. And we've got an editor lined up, but he's busy with something else, and we'll be getting to our shows shortly to edit them, because none of us have time to edit. I don't have time to edit, even though I'm still editing my own show. So there's that. A lot of the hosts are busy. It's getting harder and harder to plan our lives around getting together all at the same time. It's actually pretty rare for all four of us to be on the same show at the same time now at this point. So we're trying to figure things out, trying to strategize ways that we can, all four of us can be a presence more often on the show, and not just some of us some of the time. Even though having that many hosts it is good for when some people can't make it and some can. We kind of have played with the idea of like a rotating schedule for when some of us are busy and when some of us are available. But so there's a few kinks like that to work out. But the show isn't dead. We're going to keep it alive.
Well, I hope it goes better than God's Not Dead. Well, I made a lot of money to start. Seems like it's kind of petered out. I'm hoping the world has come to the conclusion that Republican Party and conservatives maybe don't have people's best interests, and most of the Christian arguments are kind of blah. But so we're going to transition to your show. So I joke that, Zachrilege Cast, I'm the #1 show. It starts with Z in the atheist skeptic community. But you are now #1 in the alphabetical order on my podcasts. So what made you decide to do your own show, and what'd you call it again?
A Leap of Doubt. And the reason I decided to go solo is because I wanted to expand the horizon of the kind of conversations I can have in podcasting, because Trolling with Logic has kind of a specific scope and a specific audience. It's mostly about science and issues surrounding technology and mathematics and STEM generally, and its place in society, and encouraging people to support things like STEM, talking about things like we've been talking about that I've mentioned that we've covered on the show. I was interested in covering a broader range of ideas on my own podcast that don't necessarily fall easily into the scope of Trolling with Logic.
Well, what was your, I guess, idea, or what's like kind of an elevator pitch for the show, for the uninitiated, the poor souls who will soon find out this is their favorite show,
or their least favorite?
As long as you're on the list, just get on the list, right?
Yeah. So elevator pitch. Okay. So A Leap of Doubt kind of orbits the central overarching theme of secular humanism, atheism, feminism, social justice, mental health, all sorts of things. But it is kind of squarely centered within the atheist, skeptical, secular humanism podcasting world, or at least that's how I envision it. I'm 10 episodes in, and I already have kind of an eclectic range of topics that I've covered, as I'm sure you've discovered. I talk about popular culture and philosophy. I talk about deconversion stories, personal stories of people questioning either religion or a certain irrational belief they once held. The concept of questioning is a big focus and a big recurring theme, and that's part of where the title comes in. A Leap of Doubt. It's about questioning deeply held beliefs, and whether those beliefs are religious or things like status quo assumptions held by large portions of society. I'm not sure how long elevator pitches are supposed to go, but that seemed like a long one.
It's all right. The longer answer, the better. I know I'm usually expected to be beveraging, but I just have water tonight.
Same.
I know, but you're in Oregon, man. You're in the state of great beer, although that's every state.
Yeah. We've got the Deschutes Brewery, which is pretty highly regarded.
Deschutes is great, and I don't think it quite makes it to our location, which is unfortunate. We're more like Rogue, which of course is Seattle, but that's okay. So do you like set it up? You have like a spreadsheet somewhere that has like the topics, and then when you pick it, okay, I want to talk about this topic, and then you find the guests that kind of discuss these ideas.
Yeah, so I'm actually not a very well organized person. A lot of it is in my head. I do have Google Calendar set up, and that's about the extent of my organizational skills. As far as planning shows, I have so many ideas for shows. And I'll never run out of ideas anytime soon for topics to cover and people to interview. So I basically just come up with a list and reach out to people. Typically 3 weeks to a month ahead of time. That gives me time to prepare for the topic, come up with notes, come up with interview questions, put at least that aspect of my college training in journalism into practice, the art and science of interviewing people. I at least have that I can apply to what I'm doing as a hobby. So I'm happy about that. Yeah, so most of the ideas I have come to fruition, some don't, but I'm never out of ideas.
Yeah, there always does seem to be something to talk about. So how often does the show come out, and what's the show length?
It's really up in the air right now as to when the shows come out. I'm not on a regular schedule yet. It's kind of all over the place because I'm balancing a regular job with lots of hours with trying to find time to edit my shows. And I'm also will be looking for a professional editor to take that aspect of it up because it would free so much of my time and would allow me to release episodes on a consistent, regular basis, hopefully weekly. Maybe every once in a while it'll be 2 weeks apart, but I really don't want my episodes to be longer than 2 weeks apart. That's kind of the maximum I like to wait or keep any listeners I have waiting. So right now it's kind of chaotic as to when the episodes come out, but that'll change soon, hopefully. As to length, the longest episode I did was 1 hour and 34 minutes. And I'm actually pretty hesitant to release shows that are 1.5 hours long, especially with it being audio only. And sometimes the nature of the topic and what my guests have to say necessitate long episodes like that, but not often. I like to keep most of my episodes at just about 1 hour long, ideally.
Yeah, I say ideally. I'm like 1 hour, and then I've had about 2 months of shows that end up going like 1 hour and 15. I'm like, well, you know, when you're rolling,
I like to record for 1 hour and 15 minutes. That way, after editing, it comes out at about a nice hour. So as of this recording, the last episode you have is episode 8. So what made you decide you wanted to talk about politics from like a scientific point of view? Well, my guest on that episode was John Wathy, who's actually a good friend of mine. And it was actually his idea. He approached me with the idea of, hey, can I come on your show and talk about these things I've been writing about in these articles? So I was happy to let him come on my show because I'm always flattered when somebody actually asks me to bring them on instead of me asking them. So I knew it was a topic he was passionate about, and it was the kind of topic and subject that I knew would fit in nicely with the overall theme of the show, and kind of covering like a synthesis of currents of thought, like politics and science, and how do those fit together, and how should they fit together, and how shouldn't they. And um, I think it's highly relevant, especially with the ideas we covered in that show about how can we do this better, how can we do elections better that preserve democracy in a better way. And so I hope that answers your question.
Well, there's so many aspects of our culture that just are, and people don't question them. And, we'll get to the questioning of religion pretty soon. But it does, like, everybody just assumes that politics and our election system have always been the way it is. And one thing that I still am amazed that we still do like a Tuesday election. I'm like, why don't we do elections on a weekend? Like, this is all like a lot of what our society is like based on like a farm schedule. And it's like, we don't have too many of those left. But what are some of the ideas that you found intriguing? You thought, well, maybe this could work.
I'm actually not sure where I stand yet because I haven't looked into it to the extent I need to come to a conclusion for myself. But I was really intrigued by the solution that my guest proposed, based on an idea floated by a bridge player by the name of Danny Kleinman. And it's kind of a spin-off or modified version of ranked choice voting, where
well, you have like a bunch of candidates, and you get to, instead of picking one, like is what we do now, and often picking one per party, just ranking them. And I
ranking them according to the popular vote, and assigning a number to each candidate based on how many candidates are below them in popularity. And so that way we end up with a wide selection that doesn't force people to throw away conscience votes. They're able to vote their conscience without feeling like they're throwing their vote away or giving it away to one of the two primary candidates that they are forced to choose between.
Yeah, I like the idea. It seems like we do elections differently than every other country, in that people are talking about like Bernie Sanders for 2020, like he's got to announce it really soon. And we're not even 2 years, we got 2 years plus till the election, but primaries are, will be coming up, God, too soon. But making them a narrower thing almost makes sense, because by the time we get to the election, I think that's part of the reason why we had low turnout, because it was, everybody had seen Hillary and Trump for 2 years and they were just sick of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of people didn't think they had a choice. And just the whole concept of like the very beginning of the Republican primary, when they had like 15 people, like if you had a choice of 15 people, it'd be hard to say you can't find someone who fits your own beliefs for the most part. But when we narrow it down to two, it's like, yeah, you're like flipping a coin. And then we get into bad ideas like, well, they're just as bad. Or then you feel like you can't vote for a third party candidate, even though they might fit you, because there's like, no, they might ruin the chances somebody else has of winning. And yeah. And it would be, so are you in favor of like public funds for elections as opposed to our current just fountains of cash?
That would be ideal, I think. there are some problematic aspects to the extent to which candidates are funded by uh, corporations and businesses with certain vested interests. So, yeah, I think a public pool would be nice. I'm not sure how to put such a thing into practice practically because I'm not well versed in the mechanics of politics. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask what exactly should be done different and how.
So you're gonna make a poor demagogue because you're supposed to be confident about stuff you don't know a lot about. But I see that you've named your show pretty well.
Bigly.
Bigly. And what made you decide, okay, I'm going to take on a controversial topic? Episode 7, you talked about abortion, and you actually brought in women to talk about it. What's that all about?
Well, because I felt it wouldn't be right to talk with men about the issue, and I wanted to cover it, but I obviously wasn't going to come on all by myself and wax eloquent about it as a man. So it just made sense to me that I should interview women about this issue, because women are the ones who should be listened to when it comes to topics like reproductive health care and abortion. And controversial topics, I knew from the start that I wanted to cover controversial topics, which is also something that plays into the reason I wanted to do my own show, is because Trolling with Logic, the scope of it and what it's about doesn't really go into the controversial social issues to the extent that I wanted to explore. So A Leap of Doubt gives me that opportunity to talk about things that a lot of people find uncomfortable, but I think are important to address and be unapologetic about. Because the more we don't talk about it, the more we get draconian legislation that infringes on people's rights, in many cases without us noticing it, because it's so subtle and because people with an agenda are hoping that people aren't going to talk about it openly like it needs to be.
Yeah, and actually, I think of yes, abortion is a very controversial subject, but on this side, it's like, well, there aren't too many atheists who are anti-abortion. I can see people being kind of in the middle, and it's definitely not as controversial as anything going on in the atheist community right now.
I'm scared to touch that. I'm scared.
Yeah, it's well, there's just so much going on.
I typically am interested in avoiding personal drama, and I just want to focus on the big issues, and I don't want to go after individuals. Go after ideas, go after problematic behaviors in general. Don't get tangled up in personal drama with people. That's kind of my philosophy.
Well, man, I was going to give you, here's a list of people you need to talk badly about. So we'll just skip that part of the show. We'll move on. But the best part of your show is you get to kind of debunk yourself. So episode 4, you talked about your evangelical background. And normally, I start shows by asking about someone's religious background, but I wanted us to kind of get to know you first before you got into it. So what is your religious background? Because you were on the very evangelical side.
That's partly the case. My religious background was in Protestantism, specifically Baptist. We were kind of positioned somewhere in the middle between evangelical and fundamentalist. So we weren't like the closed off isolationist extreme fundamentalist but at the same time, we weren't like enthusiastic, open, outgoing, evangelistic types. We were kind of in the middle. We were fundamentalist, evangelist, a little bit of both.
What's the
So,
like fundamental? I always think fundamentalists and evangelicals kind of the same. So where do they like disagree, or what's the spectrum there?
the spectrum is that most evangelicals are fundamentalists, but they're but when somebody calls themselves an evangelical, essentially what they mean is that they are out and active in the world, and they're not afraid to be a part of the world and to share their message. Fundamentalists, people who call themselves only fundamentalists as opposed to evangelical, they're more, we want to kind of minimize our contact with worldly influence to the best of our ability and kind of stick with our own, kind of stay within our church community and have fellowship that way without having to deal with outside forces too much, if that makes any sense.
So the fundamentalists are more like the line from Jesus about pray quietly by yourself and don't make a big deal of it.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Other parts might not agree with that, but yeah.
I think one person, I can't remember who said it, but I thought it was pretty brilliant and pretty spot on. An evangelical is a fundamentalist who will let you go to the movies.
Well, all the Christian movies now, you're set.
Yeah.
Pure flicks, man. It's big time. They got a budget. So you grew up in that kind of, so you were homeschooled, right?
Yes, I was. My whole primary education, K through 12.
Did you get to interact with other people? I mean, I guess you were interacting with other people of the same church community, right?
Yeah, my family's main source of interaction socially was the church community. Everybody in that church was homeschooled as well. Like all the kids were homeschooled. And we also kind of networked with other homeschooling families in the area. So that was the extent of our social interaction.
And what, I guess, began your journey kind of out of religion?
Oh, so I got interested in apologetics as a teenager because I was interested in science, but I was also ensconced in this environment that put a heavy emphasis and concern on creationism and a literal interpretation. Well, literal interpretation is kind of an oxymoron, but a literal reading of the Bible. And so I got interested in apologetics, defending the faith rationally, because I grew up with the sense that I was just taught that Christianity was true. It was just the way the world works. And so I grew, as a young child, I thought, of course, this personal God exists. All these Bible stories are true. That's just the way the world is, because I wasn't exposed to anything else. When I got older and started learning more about the world, to make a long story short, I came to the point where I was like, if Christianity is true, then it should be vulnerable to being defended rationally and withstanding attacks based on evidence and reason. We shouldn't have to appeal only to faith if it's true. That was my mindset going into apologetics as a teenager. My parents and church community supported my interest in apologetics, and I had this idea in my head as a teenager that I was going to be like the great defender of the faith, like the next Josh McDowell or Lee Strobel. And I went to a conference in Seattle called Worldview Academy to learn the tricks of the trade, the tools of the trade, so to speak, of apologetics, how to defend things like creationism, how to defend the resurrection of Jesus, and all these sorts of things, the existence of God. It wasn't until later that I realized that apologetics was just that. It was apologizing for the absurdity that is embedded within religion, and trying to make it respectable by fitting square pegs in round holes, essentially. Taking your foregone conclusion and trying to fit facts into your foregone conclusion to make it seem more intellectually respectable to the outside world. And I'm not sure how many other people who were also with me in that endeavor of learning apologetics took the same approach I did, but it's an approach that seemed common sense to me. It just seemed natural to me that, okay, if I'm going to defend the faith, I should familiarize myself with what the critics of theism and Christianity are saying. And I started with reading everything I could get my hands on about evolution. This was shortly after I graduated high school and moved out of my parents' house. I made frequent trips to the library and the bookstore. I read everything I could get my hands on about evolution, and I realized everything I've been taught about evolution has been a caricature, essentially. Like, they've presented this cartoon image of what evolutionists are actually really saying, and what the scientists and the biologists are actually saying is completely different than the exaggerated kind of caricature that was presented to me. So I quickly came to understand that evolution doesn't teach that one animal can like transform into a different kind of animal, and whatever else they were saying that was ridiculous.
Man, that would be cool, but
yeah, I mean, if Kirk Cameron's Crocoduck existed, that would actually disprove and falsify evolution. But all these things that the creationists had been telling me my whole life, including Ken Ham, who I met in person when I was 9 years old, everything they were saying about what evolution actually says was wrong. So I realized, and so that was kind of the first crack in my faith, and everything went downhill from there, because from that point on, all through college, as a hobby, I read extensively and as much as I could about the whole science versus religion debate, and books about the existence of God from an atheist and atheist perspective, and kind of comparing notes, and books about the historicity of Jesus, books about the way the Bible was formed and put together. And all of this new information was just fascinating to me, and it was a whole new window on the way things really happened and the way the world really works. So it was a fusion of science, history, and philosophy, and just me diving in deep, and not flinching back, not trying to ignore it or twist it into something that is amenable to apologetics, but being honest and realizing that there is plenty of reason to doubt the veracity of Christianity as a belief system, and plenty of reason to doubt that a personal God exists.
Well, what age were you when you finally used the term atheist to describe yourself?
I remember first using the term atheist to describe myself when I was 23, shortly after my 23rd birthday. And this was the time I was a sophomore in college.
And are you kind of out with your family, and how's that relationship?
Oh yeah, I've been out with my family since day one of being an atheist, and my parents remain devout Christians, and our relationship remains stable. Like they haven't disowned me or anything like that. Um, my mom likes to have discussions and debates with me about some of these topics, like the existence of God and um, the conflict between science and religion, and um, so I enjoy those conversations. So they understand that I no longer believe, and I'm not sure if saying they're okay with it is accurate, but they understand it at least, and they haven't kind of thrown me out of their life, like, which is what happens to so many people, especially young atheists.
Yeah, I think that's pretty similar to the relationship I have with my parents. Now, would you ever want to have like a creationist on your show to talk, like a Kent Hovind or Ken Ham, or even a presuppositional like Cy Ten Brukenkate, who seems to be desperately looking for someone to talk to?
Oh, is Seitan Brugenkate looking for attention?
Yeah, I think he asked someone who was on the show to debate, because I
You
remember when
know,
he debated. I'm trying to remember who it was. Was it no? Was it Matt Dillahunty or was it Aaron Ra? I can't remember, but it was bad. It was like, okay, don't have to hear that anymore, because it was pretty much like presuppositionalist, which isn't. It's like God talks to
how
me and you and I believe it, and that's more believable than anything else. Yeah.
I don't know about Seitan Brugenkate, because I don't know if um, it even makes sense to have a debate with a presuppositionalist. That seems like an oxymoron to me. But I do know Matt Dillahunty pulled it off pretty well in his debate that he had a couple years back. But I'm not sure if it would be right for me, or if it would go very smoothly for me. Not that I would like be, defeated by him in debate, but just because presuppositionalism by definition is not does not make it susceptible to debate and discussion, because there's always an out. There's always it's presuppositionalism. There's always an escape route to go back and engage in circular tactics. And if I'm going to have a debate, I would rather not like play games. I would rather like just get straight to the issues and hash it out that way. I would actually love to have Ken Ham on my show. I have reached out to him in the past, and he's never responded.
Man.
Because well, I understand it. I wasn't expecting him to respond because I'm a nobody. I'm just some atheist who says, "Hey, I'm an atheist. You want to come on my show?" So I didn't expect a response, but I would love to interview Ken Ham. Kent Hovind, I'm not sure. But yeah, in principle, I would enjoy talking to a creationist and kind of doing the whole sparring thing, having a respectful discussion about where they think I'm wrong, where I understand that they're wrong, and trying to educate my listeners through the medium of a discussion like that. So yeah, I would like to talk to creationists, because I used to be one, and I understand their arguments pretty well, and I've come to an understanding of where exactly they're wrong and why they're wrong for that reason.
Yeah, one thing you don't often get in the debates is what each person's point of view is, because they are trying to, like you say, win. That doesn't mean they have better arguments, just means they're better at debating. And then, of course, why. And not only why, it's kind of like, well, why would this be a compelling argument to somebody else? Mm-hmm. That tends to get lost. So what are some of your upcoming shows? I guess you got 2 more in the can, huh? You have a special celebration for your 10th episode?
No special celebration planned. The show I recorded earlier today was with Tony Reeves Jr., and we talked about the social and political issues explored in the Marvel movie Black Panther, and kind of discussed the art of the movie and why we both feel it's an important kind of cultural watershed moment in American cinema.
Okay, your audio is funky. It like got really choppy in the last like minute. So I don't know.
Last minute, how does it sound now?
It's still kind of choppy. I wonder. Keep talking about that episode just real quick. Just do like a sentence or two. Want to see if it's still bad.
Okay, so we covered.
Yeah, it's not. I wonder if you can come out and get back in and see if that works.
Okay.
I just clicked the link again. Sorry, but I know it's going to sound bad on the other side, so I don't. I'm like, but everybody's like, what is coming up? So give it a shot. Let me know. Yeah.
Just hang up and then we put the link.
Yeah, click on the link, come back into the room, and we'll continue from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Sorry, everybody. We had audio issues there, which happens, and I'd skipped my live reads because we were going so well, and I wanted Nathan to stay on a roll. So one show that I listened to, as I mentioned before, debates between believers and non-believers get stale after a while, but if you don't hear one in a while, it's interesting just to hear that point of view. So this week on JRR Talks, he's been on my show before. He went to American Atheists, the conference, and he had an evangelical preacher on who went to the conference and clearly didn't listen to a single word he heard while he was at the conference. But it was cool to get the kind of ex-evangelical, because Joshua was a former preacher, former pastor. So to have someone who was there and then someone who's still there and obviously trying to make a name of themselves was a great show. And we're not having any luck here. Let me go ahead and send the link again to Nathan, because I'd hate this to be like the Matthew. The last time I talked to him, he just disappeared and never came back because his computer blew up in the middle of the show. But I know what it's. I'll send the link again. But yeah, I didn't know how much we would want to talk about the drama this weekend. Of course, atheist community, dogma debate, David Smalley, the fact that he just seems to be attacking the very people who supported him for a long time, and the fine line that exists when you become like a personality, and sometimes you lose the humanity side of it. And I think a lot of people agree that the best part of Dogma Debate was the co-hosts, and then the co-hosts kept leaving and rotating, and then he moved on to Podcast One. And honestly, for me, it turned out to be more of a, I just don't listen to shows consistently anymore. I just stopped listening to them because I'm listening to my next guest, or I have interesting shows I want to talk about. And so, yeah, sometimes it can be a natural thing. And I see him. He's back.
I'm back. How do I sound now?
Oh, there you go. That's beautiful.
Great.
Okay, so I might actually, we'll see. I may actually try to audio edit this week. We'll see about that. Like, promises. But let's go back and talk about, so you're talking about your next 2 episodes, so 9 that you've already recorded. Could you go back to that?
Yeah, so I've recorded one today, and it was with Tony Reeves Jr., and we discussed the Marvel movie Black Panther, the social impact, the cultural impact, um, why we both felt it was an important film and may represent a watershed moment for gaining a better understanding and sympathy for Black identity in America. So we kind of covered, we talked a lot about like the art of the film, Afrofuturism, and why it's so notable as a movie with Afrofuturist themes, because that theme is virtually non-existent in American cinema. And we also talked about like the political and social ramifications of some of the ideas it explores. Wakanda may be a fictional country, but the place that it the politics that are kind of explored in the movie are very real, especially the contrast between African culture and African American culture here in the States.
Yeah, this is nowhere near the same thing, but there's almost zero representation of someone who doesn't believe in God that isn't like a terrible caricature online. So I was just thinking of like, Wonder Woman last year. Like, for some reason, Marvel, despite getting universal great reviews, has still not had a like female-led movie in their history. And then to have, the African American themed movie, where he had the one like bad white guy. Of course, you had the one like good guy. You had to throw that in there. You have to have the British guy with doing the American accent. You have to do that. That's important in these comic book movies. But yeah, so are you like a comic book person? Have you been keeping up with the Marvel movies?
I'm actually not a big comic book nerd, and I'm not as into like the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Marvel Universe in general as some people are. I'd like to be. I'd like to get into it more, but for whatever reason, superhero movies in generally aren't really my thing. But I do consider Black Panther to be a culturally and socially important film. So I wanted to talk about it with my guest who is very passionate about the movie. And I like having guests on who are passionate about what they're interested in. So it was a really great interview, and I'm glad we talked about it.
Yeah, I haven't gone to see I tend to be like, all right, maybe if it shows up on HBO in a year. But we actually went to see it. It was on like in the morning. I think we went to see it at like 10 in the morning because it was cheaper and it was packed. And it was like the third week it was out.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, what's going to happen with these movies, but it was a well done version of that. Of course, they have a well-oiled machine, and they're going to do 500 more of them.
500 more Marvel movies, 500 more Star Wars movies. Eventually, we're going to get to the point where the only thing that's ever played in theaters are the franchises. And all the original stuff is going to end up as like a Netflix exclusive special or a Hulu special, or all the original content with original ideas and the risk takers. They're all going to end up on streaming sites like Netflix. The theaters are going exclusively the franchises like Marvel and Star Wars. That's my dystopian prediction.
Yeah, I don't even know what like a mid-level movie is, because all the these kind of movies are like $200 million budgets, and like the latest Avengers, and it's odd that they all film in Atlanta. So in Black Panther, they're at the like London History Museum, and it's the High Museum downtown Atlanta. So it was funny. It was like a moment that was local. Everybody started laughing like, they're London, come on. There weren't too many, although there are scenes I think that were shot like outside of the city and they were actually playing like Africa. But it's very strange that they're playing these worldly like multiple universe green screen movies, and they're filming them right down the road. And these people were just living in our town. But okay, so we're almost at the end here, but we cannot finish the show And I actually, for once, told you in advance. I hear you're a big fan of dad jokes.
That's not exactly true. I hate
You
most
said
of them.
something wrong. No, but I did tell you because the last couple guests I mentioned the joke thing during the show, and they're like, "Huh," which I don't blame somebody for not being prepared when I don't prepare you. But I let you know, so it's joke time.
Okay, I got a couple actually.
Oh, two. See, special.
So, why are the stones in a cemetery called gravestones?
Why?
Uh, what, you want them to be called happy stones, you insensitive fuck?
There you go. I could see your comedy shows about to ramp up. Okay.
Probably
next,
not.
next.
So I have a problem with you know how a pack of or multiple crows all in a pack, they call them a murder of crows.
Right.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. You should not call them a murder of crows unless there's probable cause.
There you go. He's available for parties, people.
So
okay, so is there anything that I didn't cover during the show that you wanted to talk about before we call it a night? And after this, we will get you to, tell everybody where to find all your writings and shows and all that stuff, and that means you must edit faster.
Yep, no pressure again, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
I don't have anything insightful to say at this moment as like a final parting words of wisdom thing. So,
well, where can people find you online then and find your shows?
So I'm on Twitter at the Natheist. That's the Natheist, atheist with an N in front of it. So the Natheist. And I am on Facebook. Just search my name, Nathan Dickey. I'm sure most or all of your listeners have mutual friends with me. And you can find a Leap of Doubt podcast on Podbean, and it's on iTunes. You can find Trolling with Logic in even more places than that. You can find it on iTunes, of course. Also Podbean, Stitcher, a couple other podcatchers, also YouTube, and there's a website, trollingwithlogic.com. So that's my rundown of where you can find all my stuff. And I have a blog. I have a blog on the Trolling with Logic website, Skeptical Inquests.
Skeptical Inquest. Excellent. Well, if you want to support this show, you can be like Bobby, Hugh, Teody, Jeannie, and now Larry, and I'll even show it here. Go to patreon.com/Zachrilege, Zachrilege. Usually I spell it better after 2 beers, but look at that. It works either way. Follow me on Twitter at Zachrilege, like the Zachrilege Cast page on Facebook. Send all guest ideas, love mail, hate mail, all caps treatises about the world being flat to Zachrilege.cast@gmail.com. Thank you again to Nathan for being on tonight. And based on this week's social media, read your posts at least twice before posting. Think of the potential recipient and how they might take your words. Your words have power. So good night, everybody. Good luck and all that fun stuff. And chat with you soon.